Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me for another installment of Sacred War Chronicles. It's been a while since we last spoke. As always, I hope this finds you well, wherever in the world you may be. Wherever you are, I hope that your day is filled with peace. In today's video, we're going to talk about a minor event in the pantheon of human history, a battle which will determine the fate of humanity, or at least, that's what some would have you believe. I'm talking about the Battle of Sabes, between the armies of Rome and those of the Germanic tribes, and it would take place in the year 275 AD. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an upload. And if you enjoy these historical tales, please consider supporting us through the provided means. If you're already familiar with this period of history, then you know that Rome was in trouble. The empire was being pushed to its limits by the constant pressure from outside invaders, and now it seems that the gods themselves were abandoning them. Just a few years prior to 275 AD, the god Apollo had sent his oracle at Delphi into a prophetic coma after being enraged by the Roman emperor. His decision to allow paganism to be practiced freely within the empire, that would come back to bite Rome shortly. Because without the guidance of the Oracle of Delphi, the Romans would lose one key battle after another. Even though they still had plenty of military victories during this time, there was something different about these times. Something that made every victory feel hollow. Rome was losing the support of their gods, and the enemy knew it. The Germanic tribes had managed to push deep into Roman territory, pillaging and burning everything in their path. And now they were closing in on the city of Delphi itself, which was considered sacred ground. If they took Delphi, it would practically be a death sentence for the Roman Empire. So naturally, Emperor Aurelian decided to march his army up north to deal with the situation. His goal was twofold. He wanted to put down this rebellion once and for all, and he also hoped that by doing so, he could rekindle the favor of the gods and restore their guidance through the oracle. The first thing you need to understand about the Battle of Sabes is that it didn't happen in a vacuum. We couldn't just pop into existence in the middle of a battle without first understanding the events that led up to it. For the past decade, Rome had been dealing with an influx of Germanic tribes pouring into the empire. This was due to the growing power of the Goths, who were pushing other tribes out of their lands. These displaced tribes had no choice but to flee south into Roman territory, and they brought with them a taste for Roman blood. At first, Rome tried to handle this problem by making deals with the tribes, letting them settle in certain areas of the empire in exchange for their loyalty. But that didn't work out very well, because the Germanic tribes soon began raiding into Roman territory, stealing their treasure and, most importantly, taking their women and children as slaves. By the mid-70s, the situation was so bad that Emperor Aurelian decided he needed to do something drastic. He assembled a massive army and marched north to teach these barbarians a lesson they wouldn't forget. When news of Aurelian's invasion reached the ears of King Bagay of the Goths, he knew that he was in trouble. The Germanic tribes had never been united like this before, and now their chance of survival was hanging by a thread. So he did what any good leader would do. He gathered his allies and prepared to fight. As Aurelian's troops moved north, they quickly found themselves in the midst of a hornet's nest. The Germanic tribes were waiting for them, and they weren't afraid to show it. The first engagement between the two forces occurred at the river Cistern, and it was a disaster for the Romans. The Germanic tribes fought with the ferocity of cornered animals, and the Romans were pushed back to the city of Sirmium. Inside Sirmium, Aurelian regrouped his troops and prepared for the next battle. When the Germanic tribes attacked again, the Romans were ready for them. The battle was long and bloody, but in the end, the Romans prevailed. But this victory was short-lived, because not long after, the Germanic tribes attacked again, and this time they broke through the Roman lines and captured Now, Aurelian had to escape through a secret passageway beneath the city walls. This was a humiliating defeat for Rome, and it seemed that the Germanic tribes were unstoppable. But Aurelian was not done fighting yet. He realized that the only way to defeat the Germanic tribes was to strike at their leader Bagay. So he marched his army to the city of Chronicles, where Bagay was staying. The siege of Chronicles was one of the longest and bloodiest sieges in Roman history. It lasted for months, and both sides suffered greatly. But in the end, the Romans prevailed, and Bagay was forced to flee. This was a turning point in the war. With their leader gone, the Germanic tribes were in chaos. They couldn't mount any serious attacks on the Romans, and eventually they were forced to sue for peace. Now that the immediate threat had been taken care of, Aurelian could turn his attention to Delphi. The oracle had been silent for years, and it was vital to Rome that they restore her guidance. So he assembled a new army and marched to Delphi. When the Roman army arrived at Delphi, they were met by a small force of Germanic tribes. The Romans were outnumbered, but they were also much better equipped and trained. The battle was over quickly, and the Germans were routed. This was a great victory for the Romans, and it seemed that their troubles were finally over. But this was not the case. You see, while the Battle of Chronicles was a decisive victory for the Romans, it came at a cost. The Roman army was severely depleted in numbers, and they were unable to follow up on their victory. In fact, they were lucky to even get back to Rome at all. The Germanic tribes regrouped and launched a counterattack, and Rome was in trouble once again. And so the war continued on in much the same way. Rome won a battle, then lost a battle, then won a battle, then lost a battle. It seemed like neither side could get the upper hand. It wasn't until 4 years later that the situation finally came to a head. In 279, a Gothic king named Bursis marched his army into Roman territory and laid siege to the city of Me. This was too much for Rome. They had lost the support of their gods, and now it seemed like their enemies were out to destroy them once and for all. So the Romans did something desperate. They turned to the gods of the Germanic tribes for help. They offered the Goths generous terms, and in exchange, the Goths called off the siege and allowed the Romans to keep their treasure. This treaty ended the war, but it didn't bring Rome any closer to solving their problems. They still didn't have the Oracle of Delphi, and they were still being harassed by the Germanic tribes. And so it was that Rome entered into a long period of decline. They lost their power, their wealth, and eventually their very existence. It's a sad end for such a great empire, but it is a reminder that even the greatest of empires can fall if they do unlearn from their mistakes. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll love the series I'm working on about the fall of Rome. It is already in production and should be released sometime in early 2023. I hope you'll check it out when it comes out. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, then please do so, you'll never miss an upload. And if you enjoyed this video, then please consider supporting us through the provided means. We've got lots of cool stuff planned for the future, and your support would mean the world to us. Until next time, my friends, stay safe and stay educated.